So we are absolutely thrilled that you're here to join us today for our event, Kinky and Curious with Luna Matatas. We're so excited to have you here with us, Luna. How are you doing today?
I am so pumped. I've been waiting for this day. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. My name is Debjani Roy. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Associate Director of Training and Prevention with Sexual Violence Response. A little bit about SVR. You just saw the PSA, or many of you did. We are a unit under Columbia Health, and we provide a wide variety of services and programs. Our three key areas of work are advocacy, prevention, and outreach. We provide direct support to survivors and co-survivors, and we have a 24/7 helpline that is available to you as well, especially if things come up for you during this session. Kayla's going to pop that number in the chat box. We also host trainings and workshops and events like these for awareness months. And you can find out more about our work on our website that Kayla will also pop in the chat box. Every April, in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, Columbia Health Sexual Violence Response hosts a series of awareness, education, and advocacy events aimed at preventing sexual violence as we remember, honor, and celebrate survivors, advocates, and activists through programming and events, affirming that sexual assault has absolutely no place in the Columbia University community, and in the world for that matter. This year's theme, I Am, I Can, emphasizes that each and every community member's agency and ability to make an impact in the work to end gender-based and power-based violence is very real. We all have a role to play. No matter who we are, we have the power to make change, from small steps to big leaps and everything in between. Whoever you are or wherever you are from, you can help build a compassionate and accountable community where sexual assault can end. We are thrilled, as I've already mentioned, to have Luna with us here today to present on Kink and Consent, Kinky and Curious, Skills for Consensual Kink 101. We're also really excited to have co-sponsors in our community here, a group of student organizations, including the Black and Latinx Student Caucus, the Columbia Minecraft Club, Lion Les, Queer Health Alliance, and SEPA Women in Leadership. Thank you so much for supporting this event and promoting this event. A little bit about our guest, Luna Matatas. Luna is a sex and pleasure educator with over 15 years of experience teaching sex and empowerment workshops. She celebrates body confidence, self-adoration, and building shame-free pleasure in and out of the bedroom. She teaches a wide range of topics, including threesomes, BDSM, and sexual confidence. Luna created Peg the Patriarchy and Meditate, Medicate, Masturbate brands as part of her sex-positive and feminist merchandise. Luna, you created Peg the Patriarchy. You created
I did.
Yes, you
Not
did.
a certain rich actress, but me.
Exactly. So everyone, please welcome me. Please join me in welcoming Luna Matatas.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that amazing warm welcome. I am so happy to see so many of you here. I think this topic is exciting. We're going to get into some really practical things, as well as how to navigate some of the emotional things that inevitably come along with kink. And I'm really happy that we can hold space for conversations like this in the context of consent, pleasure, play. We want to have fun when we're doing these things. We want to know how to navigate them in ways that feel emotionally and physically safe for everyone that's involved. How do we do that? I have so many tips and offerings for you today, and many of them are going to be things that you might want to think about a little bit more. You might need to digest and do some searching for self-awareness or have conversations with partners. And I'm going to give you some of the questions, the tools, the prompts to be able to do that work on your own. In this space, you are welcome to ask questions. If it's a specific question about a challenge or a kink that you're into, or a fantasy or a situation, feel free to pop that in the Q&A. If there are clarifying questions, if I say a language or a word or a term that you don't understand, feel free to pop that in the chat and I can offer clarification. No question is silly. No question is, dumb or not welcome. Keep in mind that when you're asking questions, that we are focused on empowering ourselves through kink. So we're really not here to yuck other people's yum. You might not be into something that someone else is into, but that's okay. I really want to give you a broad understanding of what kinky is, and then how you can apply that in your own practices by yourself or with partners. If you are partnered or unpartnered, you might be dating, you might be looking on how to relate to other people. Now, most of us did not get sex ed that would equip us to do kinky things. Most of us got high school sex education that focused on reproductive sex ed. So I went to Catholic school, I learned nothing, but most of us did not learn the skills like communicating our desires, navigating shame about our bodies or our fantasies. How do we tell someone yes or no? How do we deal with rejection in intimate situations? How do we reject people respectfully? How do we talk about something that might be outside what is considered normal sexual activities? Does that make us weird? Should we feel ashamed about these things? So if you feel any kind of ways about kink, if you feel that it is intimidating, if you feel excited and intimidated, great. All of those feels are welcome here. I'm going to give you lots of examples on how to bust through some of these myths around kink and the ways that are presented to us as what is kinky, and here's the only way that you can be kinky. Most of the time, that doesn't represent most of us. So how many of you have ever seen porn? If you've seen porn, you might know. Feel free to use an emoji or drop it in the chat if you've ever seen porn. So if you've ever seen porn, you might know that porn is performance. It's entertainment. It's scripted. We've got a whole bunch of sensationalized ideas and bodies and ways of being when we watch porn. But there's a lot of things that are missing when we watch porn that we actually need in real life. So when we watch a kinky scene, a BDSM scene, we watch someone getting spanked or tied up, in porn, we're not getting the full picture. And kink actually, one of the reasons I love teaching kink is that kink actually made me a better partner, even in non-kinky sex, because you can't have kink without clear communication that is ongoing, without consent that includes self-consent to participate in the activities, and without erotic creativity. So erotic creativity is your brain, it's your imagination. If you think about kink right now, so think about when I say kink, what comes to mind? I've been teaching these classes for maybe like 15 years, at kink specifically for about 7 years. And still what comes to mind, even though I know kink is so infinitely creative, is black latex. So think when I say kink, you can feel free to pop it in the chat. What comes to mind when I say kink, or you think kinky, you think BDSM, what comes to mind? Because most of us think of things that we probably have seen in porn, right? We think about what is represented in porn, what's available to us in exploring sexuality and exploring our erotic imaginations, but it is so much bigger than that. When I would watch BDSM porn or fetish images, I never saw bodies like mine there, right? I never saw racialized groups or BIPOC groups represented in diverse ways. Sometimes my body was there, but it was fetishized. So I didn't have a lot of understanding how expansive, how big, how full, how exploratory kink can actually be. So think about kink. I'm going to read some of your answers in the chat, but keep them coming. Kink can be anything, actually. So usually society defines kink as things that are considered not normal sexual activity, or not average or mainstream sexual activity. So that can change from place to place. So what's normal in one part of the world might be normal or not normal in another part of the world. As groups gain more social advocacy and social rights, we also start to see what's considered considered obscene changing. So same-sex sex might have been seen as kinky, 60, 70 years ago because it wasn't socially accepted by society, even though obviously queers existed all over the place, right? So a lot of times kink is a very narrow definition. We might just think of like dom sub, we might think of spanking or rope, or we might think of kinky activities. But actually, kink is about three things. It's about sensations, so exploring your five senses and giving them erotic sensations that might stimulate your body and your mind in a different way than you normally experience these senses. So that might mean something like temperature changes. It might mean something like sensations that are soft, sensations that are hard. So those contrast of sensations. We'll get into more activities, but sensations are a big part of kink. Role play is a big part of kink. So think about when you were, kind of like very young and you were playing with friends and you had all these imaginary games, or you made up characters and stories about your toys. That imagination still lives inside of us, except now we're using it in a way that gives us an adult sexual outcome or an adult sexual reward. So we are still playing, we're into role play, we're playing with kind of some archetypes like, whatever you played with. I played with a lot of fantasy, like magical fantasy stuff as a kid. So think about what some of those role plays are and how much fun we had, how much expansion we had into our bodies. And now as adults, we get to bring a sexual or an erotic charge into those activities. And then the third thing that you can think about when you think about kink, so we got role play, we've got sensations, is your erotic imagination. So while erotic imagination can show up in role play, in characters, erotic imagination can also show up in feelings, right? So we might want to play with feelings that are uncomfortable outside of a kinky little box that we're creating. So an example of that might be something like fear. We might be playing with fear in our kinky fantasy, and that fear might not be hot outside of the fantasy. So we might want to do this thing under specific conditions. So those conditions are what we negotiate with our partners and with ourselves. So there are lots of other opportunities where we do this in a non-kinky way. Like think about if you're someone that enjoys horror movies. I hate horror movies, but if you enjoy horror movies, that's a situation where we are trading fun for fear, right? We're experiencing the fear, but it's kind of fun because, that horrible thing that's happening in the horror movie is actually not going to happen to us. So we retain some of that sensibility that this is not real, but we give up enough of our erotic imagination to this movie that we're watching so we can get some of those feelings as if it was real. We get some of that adrenaline, some of that fun, some of that excitement that might happen. Okay, let me see what you think is kinky over here. Okay, we got latex, we got another latex fan. We see consent, playfulness, absolutely. Stigma, 100%. Kink and many BDSM activities were seen as mental disorders for a very long time, up until about maybe, I think 15 or 20 years ago, so not that long ago. So if you were interested in something that was considered not normal for the definition of sexual activity, then you were seen as having a mental dysfunction or an emotional dysfunction to your sexuality. We've now redefined all of that within the Bible of psychiatry, the DSM, in order to put in the concept of consent. If you are aware of the risks of your activity, you and your partner, and you and your partner consensually decide to create this opportunity for a kinky thing, then that's actually empowering. That's actually you feeling like you belong in your erotic desires. So we're so lucky that we are moving towards less stigmatization and less shame, though it still exists a lot. So if you deal with any shame, if you deal with any feels about why you're into this, or, you know, is someone going to judge me because I'm into this? That's definitely not your fault. We have a society that has probably taught you that. So we can unlearn that. That's the good news. But a lot of it does exist still in our emotions, in our bodies, and it can prevent us from taking up space in our kinky activities. So it can prevent us from asking for what we want. That shame can prevent us from checking in with ourselves in an authentic way. Great. These are all awesome. Keep them coming. Leather, all the things, fetish, yes. I love that leather comes up, amazing. I was very happy to find sensual and soft BDSM for that reason, because I'm a big sensualist. Ooh, absolutely. A lot of times we see kinky activities and they're very harsh. You know, they're very intense, maybe even kind of cold or cruel. And it can seem like there's no room for sensuality or romance or softness or connection. And that's just not true. If one exists, the other side of the spectrum absolutely exists. But when we think about what's been shown to us in porn, it's largely informed by the cis heteropatriarchy gaze. So the male gaze is pretty much what has determined all of mainstream porn. And that's really unfortunate, because there's so much more out there. There's so much more that can inspire and entertain us. So I'm so glad that you found that softness, that you were able to integrate your sensuality. Because remember what I said about kink being about sensations, right? So sensations are what is defining sensuality, that we're using our senses to explore our erotic environment. Can you explain the acronyms? Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen in a minute, and we're going to talk about some of the acronyms of BDSM and fetish for sure. That's why audio porn in queer and femme circles are gold. 100%. I would highly recommend, if you haven't checked out queer and feminist porn, go find some. If you haven't checked out other ways of delighting your little erotic imagination other than the visual sense, definitely check out audio erotica or written erotica. Written erotica and audio erotica, it actually inspires our brain in a different way, because it activates different parts of our brain. So you can actually learn a lot more about your fantasies, how to talk about your fantasies, what are the nuances of your fantasies, even sharing a little audio porn with one of your partners to say, hey, this is kind of what I'm into. Here's my vibe. You know, those are things that can actually help create that connection to fantasy versus just performing what we've seen in porn. Because that imitation, it often doesn't make us feel confident. It makes us feel like now there's a performance expectation that I am really good. I have to be as good at this thing as I saw in porn, and that's just not realistic. You're not a porn performer, or most of us are not porn performers in this way, and that doesn't give us the opportunity to actually feel into what's right there. Ooh, oh yes, please share all the recs with each other. Okay, so I want to share. These are great. Thank you so much for popping those in the chat. It's really amazing to see how so many of us have the same kinds of first thoughts when we think about kink. And that tells us that we also probably share a lot of the myths about kink that we've been told. So I want to share my screen, and I'm going to help you understand the larger kind of conversation around BDSM and fetish. And then we're going to go into, how do we talk about, explore, get curious about kink with ourselves and our partners? And then how do we bring in giving and receiving partnered consent, as well as self-consent? Do I even want to do this thing? Am I authentically showing up in a yes way in this thing, or am I pleasing? Do I feel obligation or coercion? So we're going to get into how to navigate that for yourself. And then we'll talk a little bit about shame and shyness. So if you have questions like those, please pop them in the chat, or sorry, in the Q&A. and we'll have time at the end to be able to go through them. Okay, I am going to share my screen here with you. And okay. All right. Oops. Okay. Sorry about that. I dragged the wrong screen over. Okay. I think you can all see my BDSM screen, right? Give me a little hoo yeah in the in the chat. Let me know if that's that's still good. Okay. Yes. Oh, thank you. Look at all of you being so affirming with your communication. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. All right. Let's look at let's start with what is BDSM, because I think for a lot of us, we kind of hear the acronym of BDSM and we think about certain activities of BDSM. So BDSM stands for bondage, the D stands for discipline and dominance, the S stands for submission and sadism, and the M stands for masochism. I'm going to explain these. So bondage, what do you think about when I say bondage? What kinds of, do you think about specific tools? Like what kinds of things do you think about for bondage? Because rope, yeah, we got ropes. Yeah, that's what I would have thought of too. Absolutely. Handcuffs, absolutely. Being tied up for sure. Like I love that the being tied up. Is anyone thinking about tying someone up? Is that in there too? Did that pop up? All of these answers are so awesome because it shows the diversity of desire. It shows the diversity of curiosity, the diversity of interest in many of these activities. So bondage in itself, it definitely can be about rope. It can be about handcuffs. It can be about being tied up or tying someone up. It could also be about a scene or an intention behind a scene. So for example, you might not be super into the bondage idea, but maybe it fits within whatever role play you're doing. Maybe you're role playing, with your partner, having control over your body, and you are the person that is unable to physically move unless moved by somebody else. So that exchange of power might be amplified by bondage. Does it need bondage? No. Does bondage need power? No. It could just be a thing you do. Bondage is about creating a contrast in sensations. So bondage is about, if you were to take your fingers right now and you were to make them into the tightest fist that you can do, and then squeeze the rest of your chicken wings, your arms against your body, grip your toes to the floor, squeeze, like everything super tight, and then just let it go, you're going to feel a contrast in sensation in your hands. So you might feel tingles in your fingers. You might feel the blood flow go back into the body. So bondage is manipulating that physiological response to contracting the body, to contracting the body in a way that when it releases, that sensation goes back into it. So bondage is both physical and mental. You can have ropes, you could have psychological bondage. I might tell you to just sit there, with your hands like this for the rest of the webinar. And if you consented, this would be considered psychological bondage. So I want to give you such a broad definition of bondage, because a lot of times we might think that we need tools that require more skill, more technique than we are able to master in the moment when we want to use them. And actually, you don't need that. You could tell someone to put their hands under their bum and sit on their hands, and that's a form of bondage. Whenever we're doing things around BDSM, we're looking to create a different experience for the body and the mind, sometimes using tools, sometimes using a vibe, sometimes using language, sometimes using costumes or outfits or things like that. So it can be a lot bigger than just, oh, I want to tie you up, or you want me to tie you up. Well, why? right? Like what's the why behind that? So I'm going to teach you some of those questions to ask. Now, discipline is sometimes about behavior control. So you might be into things like being bratty, or you might be into authority. You might be into etiquette. Discipline could be about training. So some of these things you're like, I don't know, that doesn't sound sexy, or that doesn't sound hot. So remember that those things on their own are just things. They're just things that are there. But discipline is an example of a tool that becomes an outlet for your kink. So discipline in itself is not kinky until we put a fantasy behind that discipline. Dominance and submission, that's definitely something that we all might have heard about, thanks to things like 50 Shades of Grey, right? So dominance and submission are two aspects of one side of the slash of power exchange. So we've got someone who enjoys maybe taking emotional or physical power, and another person who enjoys surrendering emotional or physical power. With dominance and submission, sometimes there are a lot of gendered expectations around thinking about who's going to be dom or who's going to be sub. And I want to tell you that all that's garbage. All of that doesn't make any sense. We're actually just replicating patriarchy when we do that. Anybody can bring in dominant vibes. Anybody can bring in submissive vibes. You get to choose how those vibes are expressed. And I'm going to show you some examples of that as well. With dominance and submission, I think one of the big mistakes people make is that, and this happens to me too, when I'm on dating apps, someone will kind of come in with the idea that they're a dom, so they're going to act like a dom. You don't get to be a dom or a sub unless someone has consented to that power exchange. So it means that we don't automatically feel entitlement to someone else's power, their body, their emotions, just because we have a fantasy of that. If I'm dominant and I talk to a partner that is interested, maybe in playing with me, I have to understand if we're on the same page. I have to ask questions about what kinds of things they're into, what their power might look like if it's surrendered. There's a whole conversation that happens. It's not just assumed that dominant and submissive means the same thing for everybody. And this is where we start to really understand, hey, we actually have to talk. It might be uncomfortable. You can text, that's totally fine. But we might have to talk about the things that we want to do. And some people don't want to do that because, especially with power exchange, they might feel that it takes away from their spontaneity, it takes away from their confidence, but it definitely does not. It actually adds to it. Having clarity around the activities, the vibes, and the conditions of power exchange is the bare minimum. It's the bare minimum to be able to go into a fantasy and feel like there might be mutual pleasure for both of that. If I just come in being like, I'm a dom, do what I say, that's not dominance. That's actually domineering. You're just being awful. Like you're just being an awful person. So we don't want to confuse what non-erotic dominance looks like with actual erotic dominance, where two people are agreeing on what the conditions of the power exchange looks like. So I'm consenting as a submissive, I would be consenting enough power that are specific, here are the ways that I'm giving up power. But I'm holding enough power to be able to hold on to my humanity in this fantasy. So saying to someone, do whatever you want to do to me, that's not safe. That's not clear. It doesn't give the other person boundaries around what actually is good and what isn't good. That can be a form of dirty talk after you've clarified, okay, so here's the list of things you can actually do to me when I say do anything to me. I'm going to come back to the chat in a moment too. I'm going to finish up sadism and masochism. And I think I saw a question about the difference between kink and BDSM, and that's my little umbrella. So I'll explain that for sure. Sadism and masochism. So sadism and masochism is about emotional or physical pain. So sometimes in BDSM, people want to play with sensations that are really intense. So think about some of you might enjoy a massage that is kind of light and, you know, very, very sort of a Swedish relaxing massage. And then some of us, like me, we really like the deep tissue massage. Like I almost want to be bruised after the massage. Either way, that physical touch and that relaxing environment is creating chemical changes in our bodies, right? So we're shifting into feeling into a more relaxed state than we were before the beginning of the massage. So sadism and masochism is very similar to that. Sadists enjoy giving pain that is emotional or physical, that is desired by somebody who wants to receive that physical or emotional pain. All of this can only happen with very specific ideas and communication around what type of pain, what's the intention behind it, what do you want to feel, what do you want me to feel, how am I going to know that you're having a great time, because you actually might look like you are upset, or you might look like you're in pain that you can't handle. How are we going to figure out how to do these things in a way that gives both of us enough communication to feel confident and safe in what we're doing? So sadism can, you know, be anything from spanking to emotional sadism like humiliation or degradation. Playing with those things are considered more risky or edge play. So they aren't something that I would do with somebody that I just met. I would have to trust that we have a respectful and open communication outside of doing something more riskier or intense like these activities. So you've got the big old acronym here. And remember that you can do kink without doing any BDSM. So kink is sort of that overarching, hey, this is kind of not what you think about when people say sex, right? So we might not think about feet when people say sex. We might not think about rope bondage when someone says, I had sex with someone last night. So that's sort of the overarching thing. And remember, it varies from person to person. In the UK, face sitting porn was banned many years ago. So they consider face sitting obscene. And, you know, but it's not banned in other places. In other places, you know, sex with pregnant people is considered obscene. So that would be considered kinky in a different context. BDSM and fetish are sort of like two journeys you could take within kink. So BDSM might include one or all of the BDSM parts. It might include it at different intensities. So maybe soft, sensual things. It might include it in bigger things, like more intense activities. And then fetish is about the arousal to things that are not considered normally sex, like sex related. So we don't think of shoes or hosiery as sexual objects. In contrast, it doesn't really make sense to have a fetish for nipples, for example, because nipples or breast or chest are going to be things that we consider part of our erogenous or our body's arousal, right? They're already kind of present when we think about sexy activities. So fetish actually comes from a religious context. It comes from giving or empowering or inanimate objects a special power. And so for people who have fetishes, they actually have a specific connection, a specific pathway to arousal through things like feet or hosiery or you know, maybe an inanimate object like furniture or I forget that show where people were like in love with like their car or something. I don't know. It's like that would be considered something like a fetish. Now, BDSM, kink, and fetishes, they can be sexual in the way that we think of orgasms or genitals, but they can also be something that is non-sexual. Our erotic selves are not necessarily only about orgasms. Some people have kink so that they can discover more things about themselves, so that they can spice up their sex life, so that they can experience different things. Their partner might have suggested something. That's why they might want to be into it. So even if you fall on the A spectrum, or you want to do kink non-sexually first in order to gain trust and practice, that's still kinky. That you're still kinky. You're still got the kinky tools available to you. All right. I just want to go through this one here. I talked about it a little bit, and then I'm going to come back to the chat. So your fantasy, whatever you have in the middle here. So let's say someone's fantasy was leather. Let's say someone's fantasy was spanking. Let's say it was rope bondage. The fantasy, most people just talk about it as the tools. They're like, I want to do the spanking thing. I want to do the rope thing. Super hot. But we need more information. So if you are talking with someone about your fantasy, if you're chatting with someone online, if you're talking about someone in bed about your fantasy, the tools are kind of only one part of it. We have to also think about intentions. So why are we doing this? You know, what do we want to create? If we're watching that horror movie, we're probably trying to create fear, right? So what vibe or flavors are we bringing into this? Are we bringing in discipline? Are we bringing in adoration? Are we bringing in service or worship? And those things, you don't have to understand exactly what they mean, but the vibe or the flavor is about, what do I want to feel and what do you want to feel? If that feels challenging for you, definitely check out, you can Google the feelingswheel.com, and it gives you kind of an understanding of some of the more micro feelings that we might want to play with, so that we can describe things a little bit better to our partners. And then what sensations are we playing with? What feels and what visuals? You know, what are you going to wear? Are you going to wear a collar? Are you going to wear some leather? Are you going to wear some latex? Are we having a particular position for the bondage? Is it hands over your head, hands behind your back? You know, really kind of thinking into what that might look like. And so I've put up here an example from spanking fantasies. These are questions I would ask someone if they wanted to be spanked, or they told me they had a spanking fantasy. So I might say, well, you know, why do you want to be spanked? What do you want to be spanked with? How much impact? Like, how hard do you want to be spanked? What do you want me to feel? What do you want you to feel? What positions, clothing? Is this scene sexual? Am I going to spank you and then we're going to do something after? Or is spanking like the activity that's going to put you into your kinky headspace, and that's as far as we need to go? These questions, if you feel challenged about asking these questions, if you're like, Luna, I could never talk about this. I can't tell my partners this. I can barely, you know, even do it myself and come to terms with it myself. That's totally understandable. It's awkward. It's awkward. But the awkwardness actually is part of the authenticity. I think that there's something about showing up less trying to be cute, you know, or less trying to feel like we are performing as these like perfectly confident people, and actually having some of the conversations like what I just showed you, those questions that we might have in other scenarios. So if I was to invite you over for dinner, I might say, what's your favorite food? You know, what do you want to eat? And if you say, oh, I don't know, anything, well, then I'm probably going to make something that I really like. Whether or not you're going to enjoy it, I don't know. You didn't speak up. But as a good host, I might say to you, hey, you know, do you have any allergies? Is there any food that like you kind of don't like, but you're not allergic to? I'm going to be making pasta. Do you like it a little bit on the spicier side? Are you a vegetarian? Are you lactose intolerant? You know, there's so many questions when we care about somebody's experience, when we care about someone feeling pleasured. If I care about my friend coming over for dinner, having a really delicious meal, I'm going to ask enough questions so I get information in order to help them, or to make sure that they're going to have a good time. All right, I'm going to come answer some of your questions here, but I want you to start to think about, if there's an activity or a fantasy that you have or a partner has, would you be able to answer those questions? Would you be able to answer, what do you want to feel? Would you be able to answer, what do you want your partner to feel? Would you be able to build a little menu? What kinds of activities within this fantasy are we agreeing to for tonight? One of the big mistakes that I made when I first started with kink was that I just wanted to do everything all at once. And so that's really intimidating because I didn't have any of the skills to be able to do that. I hadn't taken any classes. I was just kind of like, oh, I can do rope, So I wasn't confident in the safety expectations as well. And that just made me less confident. So not having skill and treating kink as something that's just natural, that I'm just naturally alpha, I'm just naturally submissive, that doesn't make sense for, having a container or a box in which all of your kinky activity happens, so that you have a clear understanding. Here is where kink starts and here is where kink ends. That we're not sort of guessing, we're not really moving in with uncertainty into this activity. All right. Okay, I think all right, I'm gonna go from pulling hair as a kink too. Yes, absolutely. Pulling hair can be a kink. Some people might not describe certain things as kinky. You might find that people who are into really intense forms of BDSM, they're kind of snobbish about, they're like, oh, anal is not kinky or anal is kinky. Kink is whatever you determine is kinky. So I think of kink as any kind of creative sex. And so whatever that point of reference for creativity, that's going to be different from person to person. Okay, I hope I answered the difference between BDSM and kink question. I love that you're sharing audio stuff. Good job. Every cis man on field is a dom. That's not inaccurate. And let me tell you why. So I think a lot of times for cis men, especially cis heterosexual men, because patriarchy has given us such a limited, boring, bland, controlling idea of what sexuality and gender can look like, many people get stuck in feeling like the things that they do, these kinky things that they do, have to affirm this toxic version of masculinity. And that's not true, right? We don't have to do that. And actually, if someone's doing that, that means that they don't have that container, that their toxic, masculine, patriarchal, affirming masculinity is now bleeding into a kinky space. Even if within that kinky space, you agree together to celebrate, play with, co-create, so bring together your ideas around kink and play with themes that might be uncomfortable, like alpha stuff, or like role play where there's physical power over somebody else. Playing with those things, there should be a clear understanding that here's where that starts, here's where that ends, and here are the conditions under which that should happen. If those conditions aren't there, then actually we're just playing with patriarchy. Ew, right? So we're just playing with things that are actually harmful and violent in real life. In fantasy, we're only role playing those elements because we've created a safe system around it where we control the outcomes. Yeah, so thank you for pointing that out. Your little eye roll emoji, amazing. Consent is key, absolutely. If it's not consensual, it's not kink. And sometimes there is a challenge when we move into kink. People start to say, I'm really confused about consent, and I'm really confused about, when does it start? How do I know? I thought they said they liked that, but now they don't like that. And that's absolutely, the messiness of kind of being humans together. However, I think that there are so many missed opportunities to get that clarity around consent in the beginning and to practice that ongoing communication, that ongoing consent, so that if something changes, because consent is reversible, that we can address it together, or we can take a little break, or we stop and we text about it tomorrow and we figure out a different way to run with that. I'm going to give you some questions to think about if you are negotiating a kink with somebody else. Such an important distinction between doming and domineering. Absolutely. I think I'm a pretty nice person, and in a kinky situation, the dominant vibes that I like to play with are bossiness. And it makes me really uncomfortable to think about being bossy outside of a kinky situation. But in a kinky situation where someone has consented to receiving that bossiness, and it is exciting for them, that's what we're trying to co-create with our partners. Not just it's my fantasy and I'm coming in being like, well, this is what doms do and doms do this, and submissives are coming in with, okay, do whatever you want. That ends up in a hot mess. That's where people get harmed instead of actually just enjoying the change in sensations, the change in role plays. We might be trying to create emotional or physical pain in BDSM, but we never want to create injury. So there's no injury that we are pursuing in BDSM. Is there a quiz or question you recommend on the internet that can give a sex partner to find out you're both compatible with? Yes, I can send that off to the organizers, because you're going to get an email tomorrow that will contain the link to the consent questions that I'm sharing with you. And I can pop in there on there. But if you're eager right now, you can Google BDSM test and some of them will come up. What they look like is a yes, no, maybe kind of checklist. So it'll list a bunch of kinky activities and whether or not you're curious about this. Some of those are great, but the conversation we can use that as a conversation starter. Because if you say, yes, I'm into rope bondage. Okay, cool. So are you into watching it? Are you into receiving it? Are you into doing it? Are you into it because it's sensual, or because you have a kidnapping fantasy? Are you into it because you're dominant or submissive, or you just like being tied up and having other sexual activities happen? So definitely a great conversation starter for folks who are like, well, I don't even know what's out there. I don't even know if I'm into something. Are there recommendations for places to buy a strap-on? Yes, probably. I can definitely help out with some shopping questions for sure. So strap-on play is where some people consider strap-on play kinky. Other people consider it just the way they have sex. So a lot of queer people use strap-ons to engage in penetrative sex in many different ways, and it might not be seen as kinky for them. Doesn't even matter, because all the questions that we're talking about today, they lend themselves to any kind of kinky activity. They lend themselves to any kind of sexual activity where you're negotiating a mutual, shared, consensual pleasure. Mutual, shared, consensual. If we're all not having a good time, nobody should be having a good time. So you gotta shut that down if no one's having a good time. But yes, I can definitely share some strap-on resources. I'm sure you've got some fantastic places that are local to you and that offer things like discreet shipping and stuff like that. I believe I wouldn't know how to answer because I have no reference for those answers. Absolutely. You don't need to have experience to make decisions on activities. So even think about anything that I've said today. If you've had a reaction to it, if you've had a curiosity, if you've had a, why do people do that? If you've had a, oh my gosh, yeah, I want to do that. So tuning into that self-observation, what is in your feeling when you're reading some of the yes, no, maybe list. It doesn't have to be like a resume. We're kind of looking into what might spark my curiosity. Think of it as window shopping. Like, who knows if it's going to fit, but we might be curious to an element of it. We might be curious about latex, but we don't have a sexual arousal to it. And that's okay. So sometimes for people, kink can be confusing because that sexual response might look different in a kinky way. Many people have non-sexual kink and still feel some of that oxytocin, that dopamine, that adrenaline, those chemical changes in our bodies that happen when we have non-kinky sex, when we have any kind of feelings of arousal or desire. These are great questions and comments. Thank you so much. Consent is reversible. 100%. We see so many stories in the news, right, of someone saying that somebody consented to choking and it went in a direction that they didn't want, and yet their partner kept going. That's just assault, right? Like that's like, okay, there were signs here that something was off. If there is any doubt in any of your activities, if there is any doubt that this person is still enjoying this thing, if there's any doubt that you are not giving this person, what they want, or are they doing it just to please you, or are they unable to engage in consent in a meaningful way, then we stop. Right? We stop and we check in with kindness and curiosity. We don't check in with coercion and obligation. Well, you said you wanted to do this thing and now you don't want to do it. And, we're like, hey, is something up? Because I'm kind of feeling a little bit of a disconnect, or I'm not really sure if you're having a great time. If you are, we can keep going. If not, we can totally do something else or try again another time. So there's never any pressure in kink. There's never any pressure in BDSM, even if it looks like we are exchanging power. Because remember what I said about power exchange is that we're only giving up enough to retain our humanity. And dominance can only take power that someone has given to them. So if you haven't given me your full humanity power, I'm not going to take that away from you. That's a violation of consent. Oh, great. We're dropping some BDSM test links. Amazing. Thank you for that. Oh, good. Okay, good. You're getting all these. These are great. Have I thought about creating a more updated or a more nuanced one? I have not, but I bet somebody has. I bet someone's working on it right now. It's a great idea to have one that might be a little bit broader for people. Kindness and curiosity. Yeah, good. I'm glad we're affirming that, because we are not here to put more pressure when someone might be struggling. Any thoughts about the life-risking kinks that people have consented to going in a bad direction? So CNC, breath play, and cutting. Absolutely. So CNC is sometimes called ravagement play, or it's consensual non-consent. So it means that we're role playing beyond using words like no or stop. We might be engaging in fantasies that are about no consent. So abduction fantasies, or fantasies of authority, like maybe you are a prisoner or something like that. Some people use it to role play things like being physically forced to do something. And breath play is about breath constriction. So choking doesn't have to be breath play. But many people are engaging in cutting off air supply for a physical high and the emotional high of maybe a predator vibe or a dominant vibe or something like that. And cutting can, any kind of body modification might be a form of sensation play or connected to sadism or masochism. I think that all kinks have risks, as they have emotional risk and they have physical risks. So in order to participate in a kink, we need to be risk aware. So that means if you are someone that is giving up power to your partner to play with a fantasy of force, then it means that you have to understand what those personal risks are for you and also for your partner. So that might mean, risk to the relationship. That might mean, oh, now we see each other a little bit differently after we've done this thing. It might mean more serious risks, like creating trauma in the body, pushing someone past a limit or a boundary inadvertently or intentionally. So any kind of kinky thing you do absolutely has a risk. There are higher risks for certain types of play, sometimes with tools, but even thinking about the difference between humiliation and degradation. So humiliation is usually about like poking fun at someone. Maybe I make you wear a clown nose and make me coffee or something. But the other side of humiliation play is degradation play. And so degradation is about someone's self-esteem, their self-worth. People sometimes eroticize this type of taboo feeling or like darker emotions because it feels like a safe place to experience those emotions, right? It's not fun to be degraded or humiliated in real life, but in kink, those powerful emotions are just the other side of the coin of softer emotions like joy or adoration or care or worship. So they're part of the same type of intensity, but they are the shadow side or the dark side of that. So I think that there's so many people who play with these types of activities, and they aren't necessarily aware of what the risks are, or they're too shy to let their partner know the kinds of things that need to be created in their conditions in order for them to feel safe to do this. So let's say you want to play with consensual non-consent with a partner. Do you trust this partner? Have you practiced with this partner saying no or saying yes in less risky situations? So you can start to play with power in ways that are less edge play, less risky play, less intense play. This might look like, you and your partner like to give each other oral sex. So for one night, maybe your partner takes control of your orgasm and you practice using a word that calls stop. You practice speaking up about what feels good and what doesn't feel good, versus, finding someone and saying, yeah, can we role play this really intense fantasy? I'm not sure how to take care of myself. I'm not sure how to tell you how to support me to take care of myself, but let's just try the thing. Oftentimes that creates harm for a lot of people. It might also create, even if it's not creating trauma, it might just create a poor experience where you feel you didn't have the control or the empowerment that you needed within that fantasy. Okay, I know there's a ton of lovely, amazing stuff in the chat. I'm going to come back to it because these questions, I love that some people are dropping in here: risk aware, consensual kink, rack. These are systems of consent that kinksters kind of came up with. I'm going to show you another slide that looks at consent, and I think I think the next slide is what you're going to have access to in the link. So let me double check here. All right, here we go. So consent is freely given. And what does freely given mean, right? I mean, freely given means that I don't come on to Field or these dating apps and say, I'm a dom, hear me roar, right? I'm going to come in and I'm going to make sure that I have your consent to engage in a power exchange before I do that. Consent is ongoing. It doesn't mean that what we've negotiated at the beginning is what's going to be the conditions as we continue our play. So this is really important because when I teach BDSM classes, a lot of people ask me about contracts. You know, should I create a power contract like in 50 Shades of Grey, right? Should I create something that says, here's the power I'm taking in writing, here's the things that we're going to do? That might be a great kind of ritual. It might be part of your role play. Like it feels like, oh, we're like writing out. It might be part of the sexy excitement. Is it part of the consent? It might start the conversation, but it is not a guarantee, right? Because consent is reversible. So whatever you put in that contract is only as relevant as what is happening in the moment that feels good or doesn't feel good. So consent contracts are like cover your butt kind of stuff. Like who wants that kind of consent? I want to teach you how to do consent that is caring about the other person's pleasure. If they are not having the kind of pleasure that they want to have, then it's not consensual. Then we're not doing consent. I put the word here engaged. Often you'll see enthusiastic, but when we're playing with things like kink, we might not see enthusiasm in the same way that we do in other sexual activities because we're role playing with some of those darker or taboo emotions. So you might be playing with fear. You might be playing with reluctance. Also, for a lot of us, you might have challenges. I definitely do. We might have challenges kind of being dirty talkers, or we might have challenges kind of speaking up about things. Someone mentioned something around experience. So we might not have that kind of experience. And so we might be reluctant, but consenting. We might feel like, you know what, this thing is really intimidating, but I totally want to do it. So we might not be all super excited, but still consenting. So that engagement needs to be there. Can someone be engaged when they are not sober? No, they cannot. They cannot have engaged consent if they are using substances that takes away their ability to have engaged consent. Does that mean that everyone is doing kink and sex sober? No. So we know that people are drinking, they are using substances, and that may alter our ability to be clear about consent in an engaged or an informed way. Informed means that if I say, yeah, I want you to spank me, and then I want us to kiss, and then I want to cuddle. That doesn't mean that in the middle of all of that, you bring out bondage because you think bondage is part of the scene that I just didn't talk about it. So informed consent means that we are really specific about what we are consenting to and how it is done. So that being specific about it is part of what I hope I'm gifting you some of tonight in getting into our fantasies in a way that helps us have that information. And remember, you're not going to have it overnight. It's going to take some time. And if it feels awkward and you feel like you're over communicating, you're doing it right. You know, if it feels awkward, you are doing it right. We are all awkward at this. No one is suave. I'm not suave, and I teach this all the time. I have conversations like this. These are the questions I use. Who cares about all that? I care about you feeling more satisfied and more safe in your erotic fantasies and what you want to do. I want you to have more empathy for your partners and less intentions around, I have to be the best at kink or the worst at kink. Who cares? You know, what pleasure is available in the moment and how are we supporting that? So the reversible part, we talked about these questions that I popped up here for you. You know, when does consent start? When does it start on the app? Does it start when we meet up? Does it start when we start to have sex? I think consent starts as soon as we have an interaction with somebody. So if we are on an app, and many of us have had experiences like this, where we get an unsolicited nude picture, right? It's often a dick pic. So, you know, that's not consensual. I didn't consent to see your body. I didn't ask for this. It makes me feel unsafe. So I know you've got a session coming up, I think, about tech stuff too. That's a great place to start to consider, hey, what does this mean for consent and safety? Like, what does it mean? What kinds of things might I be doing or might I be tolerating that are actually not consensual? Do you know what their signs of pleasure or displeasure are? Do you know what they look like when they're having a great time, right? I am someone who's chatty and animated when I'm having a great time. If something's wrong for me, I go very quiet and I kind of check out, and it's very hard for me to make eye contact. So I will say that to someone. I'll be like, hey, if I'm quiet and not making eye contact, something's wrong, and I might not be able to tell you what's happening. And so knowing that about yourself is a form of self-consent. It's a form of protecting your boundaries around how you communicate and equipping other people with that information. What will you do I can't see my screen, sorry. If you aren't sure about continuing, what are we going to take a little break? Are we going to get clarity? What happens if you're triggered? If you're playing with things like consensual non-consent and you are the giver or the receiver, do you know how to take care of yourself and each other if you are triggered? Do you have some tools for grounding? Do you have some tools for being able to maybe calm or relax your nervous system, like drinking a glass of water or, holding a texture that feels really good for you? Maybe there's something that your partner says to you or the way that they give you space that can help you if you get triggered in these moments. Have you discussed aftercare? Aftercare is a concept that Kinksters came up with, which usually means what are the activities we're going to do when the kinky activities have ended and we're trying to kind of put ourselves back together as non-kinky humans. So it's what are the activities that make us feel grounded and safe and like we've come back to our non-kinky selves after kinky play. That might be debriefing. That might be watching a funny show together. That might mean sharing some food together. That might mean cuddling. That might mean showering or cleaning up the room or any of those things. But aftercare is 100% a part of the consent conversation if you are doing kinky things. And many people skip this conversation because they kind of feel, oh, that's for more romantic relationships. Even if you are hooking up with someone, even if you are playing with somebody, casually, aftercare is something that you should at least ask about and think about for yourself. It's not only submissives who need aftercare, anybody doing any kind of kink or sex actually needs aftercare. I want to talk about this one, the power outside of your space. So if someone holds social power over somebody else, so either through gender, age, wealth, experience, any of these things might inadvertently come into your space, in your kinky space. So race is another example. So you want to think about what are the potential ways I might have social power over this person? What are the potential ways that this person might have power over me? And being observant if those power dynamics start to influence things. So if someone feels that they are able to tell you what to do or gaslight you or doubt your boundaries because they're older and more experienced, that's a red flag. That's something when someone starts to ignore you talking about or asking for things that you need to be emotionally and physically safe and to have a great time. Those are red flags. Someone should be curious about your pleasure. Someone should be excited for you to talk about your pleasure and to get to know what these specifics are so that they can participate in a consensual way for themselves as well. All right. I know this is a lot. This is like so juicy. It's so out there. And I hope it's feeling affirming for you. I hope it's feeling like, yes, let's all have kinder, more fun, more consensual experiences. Now, I'm going to get to the chat in a minute, but I want to ask some of you, have you heard of the choke me daddy kind of meme? Have you seen this on like TikTok or whatever social media you're on? I feel like this was This was going around so much. And yes, okay, some of you have like, so it's really interesting because choke me daddy, you might hear that and think, oh yeah, like it's about choking. It's about like hands on neck. But remember, there's sort of a daddy vibe to it. And what does that mean? You know, what are people talking about when they say choke me daddy? Like, do they actually, yeah, Google it. Like, do they actually want to be choked? Like, is everyone just into choking? Is that how we have sex? Maybe, but I actually think that choke me daddy is more of a vibe. It's a vibe. So what's a vibe? A vibe means that, you know, we are communicating with our language, with our body, with our intention. We want to influence someone to feel a certain way. So when we say someone has a confident vibe, you know, what do you think about? If someone has an arrogant vibe, what do you think about? So choke me daddy doesn't have to involve choking, but it might be about authority. It might be about possession. It might be about a vibe of ownership. It might be about a vibe of discipline. It might be about a vibe of punishment or reward. It might be about feeling kind of primal. The neck is a really primal place. Does it mean that you have to go out and choke or get choked if you are interested in these fantasies? No. You can create vibes without the risk. So breath play, choking are risky activities. If you're like, but choke me daddy, that sounds so hot, great. Do that without the risk. So that might mean that the hand around the neck is not actually putting any pressure. It's more symbolic. And then you're going to use all the rest of you to actually show up in that vibe. That might be language that you choose to use, like daddy kind of language. And that might be about maybe your partner wants to feel nurtured and cared for, and then feel this contrast of discipline. So you're building a scene with a person. We're not just saying, come over and play choke me daddy. We're like, oh, okay, so how would this start out? You know, what would you do when you first come over? And if someone says, oh, I'm gonna choke you and push you against the wall, that's starting too quick. That's not giving any warm up for that vibe. It's not giving any kind of opportunity to actually sink into those forms of consent, those characteristics of consent that I just showed you. So is that informed? No. Is it freely given? No, because this person's already starting to act as, I am the daddy, I will say what to do. We need to discuss, what are those menu items? How intense are we going to do these things? What do you want to feel as the recipient of Choke Me Daddy? And what do I want to feel as the giver of Choke Me Daddy? So the activities are far less critical than actually how you're going to do them and what you want to get out of them. All right, so I can't believe, oh my gosh, we have so many goodies going on here. I'd encourage you to get your questions into the Q&A, because I will go to those in a few minutes. I'm just going to scan the chat to see if I missed some things, but I think you all were being very sweet and very helpful to each other, which is amazing. All right, it's really great that you said it. I think this is referring to the consent piece. Because I feel like there's a sense that once you put stuff back, once it's out there, it's hard to take it back. So it's okay to change your mind. 100%. It is if you came over to my house and you told me exactly what kind of food you wanted me to make for you, and then you came over and you were kind of like, oh, actually, you know what? I don't really feel like this anymore. I'm not going to hold you down and force feed you food. I'm not going to guilt you into saying, well, I worked so hard on this, or, you know, but this is what you said you wanted. Like, look at our text messages. I'm going to say, oh, okay. Like, is your tummy upset, or is there something else we can eat? Is there anything here that you're interested in? Should we order food? Like, what should we do? So we want to bring some of that care, that humanity back into our experiences with other people, instead of treating people like objects that are there to fulfill our fantasies, which includes treating ourselves like objects. If you are consenting to something with somebody else, it's so important to think about, am I doing this because I want them to like me? Am I doing this because I feel unsafe or worried about what's going to happen if I say no? Am I doing this because I don't think there's another way to do this? There's not another way to be kinky with this person that's going to feel good or pleasurable, or there's not another way to be dominant or submissive. I guess this is just what doms or subs do. If you're doing it because you feel that this is what everyone is doing and this is how people have sex, those are opportunities to kind of check in with yourself about feeling maybe pressure or obligated or coerced into doing something. It can be really hard to identify that, when we really like someone, when we really want to be adventurous. But remember, so many of us have not had very validating and affirming sexual experiences around our choices, our boundaries, and our bodies. So because we've not had that, we need to give it to ourselves, and we need to give it to the people that we choose to have relationships or dynamics with. We really want to leave people better off than we found them, right? I want people to think back and be like, you can think I was boring, great, but I don't want them to think back on me with harm. And my pleasure doesn't come from ignoring other people's pleasure. It comes from making sure that we're both having a great time, even if our pleasure looks different in this moment, right? Your pleasure might be fear, mine might be about being bossy in that moment. Self-consent can be very challenging, particularly if we have backgrounds of trauma, whether that's physical or emotional trauma, because those were moments where we didn't have control over what was happening. So some people find that being able to play with some of those darker emotions or memories, it gives them a sense of being able to recreate the experience in a safe way. So now they're choosing to have whatever activity or sensation that wasn't consensual before. Now they're choosing to recreate that experience in a consensual way. Kink is not therapy. It's not a healing modality. It's not therapy, but people do use it as a way of exploring the self, exploring parts of yourself that might be hard to access. All right. I'm going to scan through some of these. Some of them your questions are fantastic. They might be a bit specific for me to be able to get into tonight. So I'm going to note them. And if there are resources that will help you continue your learning, you might need to take classes in order to get techniques or do reading or research. I will put some books in the notes that you're getting for you as well. But I think there's one here about blood flow. That one I'm not gonna get into because we're not doing a technique-based class today, but it's a really good question in order to kind of figure out, like, is this a risky activity for me, or is this something that I don't feel that great about? All right. I think some of these were good. Okay, some of these were answered. What do you do if your monogamous partner doesn't want you to do the things you want and you feel the sex is too vanilla and boring with them, but they like it and don't feel comfortable with what I suggest? What then? So this is often a challenge for people in relationships. I've experienced this as well, where you might have a fantasy that really excites you, but your partner isn't into it. So one thing I would think about is that if you've talked about your fantasy as the activity, so if you've said to your partner, hey, I really want to do anal, and your partner is like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. Not into that. I like what we're doing. So first of all, good for you for being able to talk about what you like. That's really hard to speak up about our desires. I would ask if you've talked about it in a way that moves beyond the activity. So have you said to your partner, I want to do anal because I kind of want to feel like I get to be the giver. So you get to receive anal since I'm usually the receiving partner in penetration. So I want to feel like a different version of maybe power or giving or receiving. That sometimes opens up conversation for your partner to connect to some elements of your fantasy. They might connect to the giving and receiving, but maybe not anal. So you might do something else that still has those vibes, that has those flavors, that has those elements of your fantasy, but just not in the way that you've imagined. Sometimes people come home and they're like, yeah, I want to tie you up, babe. And which is so cute. And I think I've done that too. But it can be really intimidating. So ask your partner and maybe have a discussion about this during a non-sexy time. You might say, okay, like, can you tell me a bit more about why you're not into this? Like, maybe we can have a discussion about our desires and find ways where we intersect. This is an important conversation, whether you are in a relationship with someone for 10 years or, one night, because being able to own your pleasure, but not make someone feel obligated to pleasure you might help you have conversations about different ways to bring that pleasure in. It might mean that you just dirty talk about this thing sometimes. It might mean that you both like watch porn or erotica or read erotica about this thing. So it's feeding your erotic imagination, but maybe you're not doing the activity. All right. Amazing. Oh, good. We've got Betty Martin's in there. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Okay, fantastic. I'm so glad. All right. So I'm going to come to the Q&A here. Oops. Oopsies. All right. All right, this is a great one. So what are your tips for exploring or testing if you respond to something without trying it personally or turning to porn? It feels like porn is so accessible and therefore the easiest place to turn to find out if something interests you. 100%. Porn's like right there. It's like easy to search. There's all kinds of categories. I think that definitely trying some of the BDSM tests that were mentioned. Also checking out erotica, audio or written erotica, because a lot of times things in erotica give a bigger description. So they can't just say, she walked into the room and spanked everybody. They're going to have to describe, the vibe that she walked in with, or like the who she's spanking or how she's spanking them. So it can give us more of those connections to hang on to. Because remember, spanking can be playful. It could be about punishment. It could be about pain. It could be about reward. It could be about a role play. It could be about discipline. It could be just because your partner has a nice butt. So that's what, seven different fantasies of spanking. So the curious part is getting curious about our own desires, maybe by shopping around. Sometimes it's about talking with other people about our desires. So approaching your partner with a, hey, have you ever thought about this? Is it like, how do you feel about this? I don't know why people are into this, but I'm kind of curious. Not everything is going to result in an orgasmic explosion. Not everything's going to result in high sexual arousal. It might just result in an opening up of your erotic imagination. It might result in physical changes, like feeling kind of excited or feeling nervous about something. That's kink. You're doing the kinky thing. One thing I want to mention about creating ongoing safety that I forgot to mention before, but it's super important because it empowers us to feel more confident and communicative with our partners. So safe systems. Now, if you have a safe word, if you know what a safe word is, drop yours in the chat. I would love to see what people's safe words are. So safe words are something that is language that is not related to your scene or your role play or whatever you're doing. So it might mean that, if you are doing, you're getting seduced at the fruit market by the fruit seller, your safe word probably should not be pineapple. Right? Because that might be a word that shows up in your scene. People use safe words in kink because sometimes they're playing with manipulating or role-playing language that normally would mean stop or no. So instead of having to say those words, we're going to use a single word really quickly that is very clear for everybody that something's off, like we need to stop, we need to slow down. Now, safe words are only one form of safe systems. I actually prefer to play with safe systems. So safe words are great to have just to be like, nope, nope, nope. Safe words only work if you feel comfortable using them. So if you are like most people, and myself included, if you feel shy about talking about your needs, if you feel shy about asking for what you want, it's going to be hard for you to use your safe word when you really need it. So practice using safe words when you don't need it. That might mean you say to your partner, hey, you know what? I feel like I just want to practice using my safe word because sometimes I want to, and then I feel shy about it. And so I'm going to call it once while you're going down on me, or once while you're spanking me. And it might mean that nothing's wrong, but I just want to practice being able to say it. You can use a safe system like a traffic light system. So red, yellow, and green. Red means stop. Yellow might mean, does yellow mean go slowly and continue? Or does yellow mean I'm close to my edge? So, like, let's stop. I don't know. You got to define yellow with your partner, right? There might be different interpretations of it. And then green means everything's good. Like, go ahead. Like, let's keep going. Another safe system is like a number system, which you can communicate verbally or non-verbally. So a number system might have intensity of 1, where it's like we're at the beginning, we're kind of at the beginning of the scale. And then 5 is like, this is the maximum. We need to stop. So having this, even if you're not doing things like increasing spanking intensity, but if we're ramping up in consensual non-consent play, we're getting rougher, we're getting more aggressive. Having a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 might help you gauge, are we both increasing in intensity at the same time, or is someone moving things that is too fast for the slowest person in the dynamic, right? It's also really helpful because some people are not super verbal in their communication. So if you are someone that is the doer, you are either the top, the dominant, the giver, the doer, you might remind your partner, hey, you have a safe system. Do you remember how to use it? Do you remember where are you at right now? Where's your yummy little self at? You're at a 3? Okay, good to know, right? We also want to know that someone it feels comfortable to use it. I want you to think about other ways that people say yes or no, right? So I told you that avoiding eye contact is a way that I often say no, because I'm not ready to say no, or I'm kind of shutting down. I might be withdrawing. I might be avoiding that conversation. So my partner would then know, okay, something's a little bit off here, right? Something doesn't make sense. If you're not sure what those enthusiastic signs are from your partner, ask them. Some people get really giggly when they're having a good time, right? Some people get very solemn when they're having a good time and very quiet, and the other person might interpret it as a sign of pleasure or displeasure, but we're not sure unless we get that confirmation. Okay, I feel like I could talk with you all for like a million hours, but squiggly, you got a squiggly consent. Someone's word is squiggly. I love that. I'm so sorry. I didn't even realize we were right at 7:30. So I think those are all the questions I can can answer. I'm gonna turn it back to Devjani to see where we're at.
Hi. Well, that flew by.
You know.
We have one more question here. I might have missed this, but is there a list of vibes, flavors that exists? Examples, reward, discipline, etc.
Ooh, some of my classes, I create different lists. I don't know of anything broadly, but I would suggest checking out the feelingswheel.com. Feelingswheel.com will kind of give you a sense of, oh, do you want to feel fear? Maybe you want to feel irritation. Maybe you want to feel annoyance. Maybe you want to feel, not secure. So it sometimes lends a little bit better language than maybe some of us have the capacity to talk about.
Luna, thank you so much. That chat box was just alive and well. So much good information, interaction. Thanks for making this accessible, inclusive. I feel like not everybody talks about the subject in the same way, and it was very affirming. for me, for sure. And you talk a lot about bringing our humanity back, sitting in kindness and curiosity. Just bringing it back to that level is so crucial and important. And it doesn't have to be this like exclusive othering of like kink is like this other thing over here. No, 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 no. It's for everyone. It's about liberation, right? So Luna, thank you for bringing that vibe into the space and for presenting to our community and students. I wanted to thank our co-sponsors for promoting the event and for our participants for being so active. Wonderful. Just a quick announcement, we'll be doing a draw for 10 attendees to receive free access to Luna's BDSM 101 webinar. We'll be in touch soon. We're going to be using a randomizer to pick the 10 attendees. And also, if you want to get involved with SVR, you could volunteer with our office. I know there was a slide up earlier, and Kayla will pop that in the chat box there, or put the QR codes up. So thank you so much, Kayla. Luna, thank you so much. This was an absolute joy and pleasure to have you here. And thanks everyone for attending.